It's time once again for Uncle Matt's bedtime story.
Hello, everybody. It's Uncle Matt, and I'm here to read you another bedtime story. And tonight, I'm going to read you a story that happened at a residential school off of Alert Bay, or in Alert Bay, just off of Vancouver Island. And this experience happened to many First Nations, many Aboriginal people in Canada and around the world, I guess, different Aboriginals that were put in residential schools. So some of this content might be a little disturbing or upsetting, but it is told from kind of someone's life experience, and I wanted to share that with you. It's called White Raven, and it's written by Toni Spathelfer, illustrated by Natassia Davies. And this story was copyright in 2021. Okay. Just going to read a little bit of this forward before we get into the story. This book is a small glimpse of my mom, Lena White's life at St. Michael's Indian Residential School in Alert Bay, BC. Her spirit suffered, but she was stronger than she realized. Mom healed and took back her spirit through workshops for residential school survivors. In honor of my mom, her sister, her cousins, and her friend and schoolmate, Chief and Dr. Robert Joseph of Reconciliation Canada, I remain committed to making sure your lives mattered. You all deserve to be cherished as children. I have always believed your stories. Love you all to the Nuzi, which is moon, and back. Let's get into the story. When Little Wolf was all grown up and had a family of her own, she and her husband decided to move out of the city and into the country to the island where she was born. They wanted their children to live in a safe place surrounded by nature. Little Wolf showed her daughters around their new island home, sharing the beauty and mysteries of the land and sea with them. They all loved going to the white shell beach called Amidon. This was an ancient place where First Nations people had harvested food and gathered for meals for as long as anyone could remember. Along the seashore, they watched orca whales swimming and listened to the sea lions barking on foggy days. In the forest, they laughed and, I don't know this word, pileated, Pileated, pileated woodpeckers, and smelled the wildflowers as eagles soared overhead. Little Wolf's family loved falling asleep to the beautiful and timeless song of the spring frogs. Little Wolf's mother, White Raven, visited the island home often. White Raven loved to see her granddaughters happily exploring the world around them, just as Little Wolf had done when she was a young girl. But visiting daughter and granddaughters also made White Raven think about her own childhood. White Raven had a very different, very unhappy childhood. Although it was difficult to talk about, she knew she had to tell her granddaughters what she had lived through. They needed to know this part of their family history, and so one day, when they were all together, White Raven began to tell her story. There's kind of a picture here of a building. White Raven was born in a beautiful island village not far from where Little Wolf and her family live now. For the first few years of her life, she was surrounded by family, community, and nature. But everything changed when she was 6 years old. That was when White Raven and the other children from her village were taken from their families. They were brought to a place called St. Michael's Indian Residential School in the faraway village of Alert Bay. White Raven and the other children traveled for 2 days by boat from their village to the school. When they arrived, White Raven was terrified. There were so many strangers. Some were adults who worked at the school, and countless others were children from different villages. White Raven missed her home and her small island community, where she knew everyone and always felt safe. White Raven didn't know it at the time, but she was one of 150,000 Indigenous children from across Canada who were forced to go to residential schools. White Raven, her sister, her cousins, and the other children from her village went to the school for 10 months a year. They lived in the school dormitories, where many beds were crammed into one big room. Most nights, White Raven couldn't sleep. Someone in the room was always crying because they missed their family. White Raven spent 10 years at the residential school. During that time, she experienced many bad things. As soon as she arrived, the school staff shaved her head and applied a dangerous pesticide called DDT to it. They did this to everyone, wrongly believing that all the children had lice. The DDT was supposed to kill the lice, but it burned their skin and made the children feel like they were not good enough. The children never had enough food to eat. The little food they did get was often rotten, with mold and bugs in it, or they got raw sausages, which made them sick. They only got oranges and fresh fruit at Christmas time. White Raven was always hungry. She sometimes ate toilet paper to make the hunger go away. White Raven's little sister was at the school too. But White Raven wasn't allowed to look after her like she did at home. They weren't even allowed to talk or play together. This made her feel even more lonely. If the children spoke their own language, the children washed their mouths out with soap so they would remember to speak only English. The staff and teachers never called the children by their names. Instead, they gave each student a number, which they had to memorize. White Raven's number was 534. When the children lined up to take showers and White Raven heard her number called, she had to race to the shower to get cleaned. The water was always freezing cold. White Raven had trouble seeing the blackboard, so the teacher moved her to the front of the class. When she still couldn't see, the teacher did nothing to help. Instead, she made fun of White Raven in front of the whole class. From then on, White Raven was too nervous to speak up. When she was finally allowed to get her eyes checked, the doctor said there was nothing wrong with her, and she didn't need glasses, but White Raven knew this was not true. White Raven had to do many chores at the school. She picked up garbage in the fields, washed dishes in the kitchen, and milked the cows. The children drank watered-down powdered milk, and only the staff were allowed to drink the fresh cow's milk. In spite of how badly all the children were treated, White Raven was glad her sister and cousins were close by. As all children do, they occasionally managed to have fun together when the adults weren't watching. Most of the staff and teachers at the school were very unkind to the children, but one teacher was nicer than the others, and her name was Mrs. Oak. White Raven often spoke about her favorite teacher later in life. She recalled how Mrs. Oak took good care of her when she was sick with the mumps, especially when the other kids called her Lumpy. Once, Mrs. Oak even made White Raven a new dress out of some spare fabric. Another thing that cheered her up during her time at the school was a rare white-colored raven, which often landed close to her on the playground. It made her happy to see the beautiful bird and reminded her that she was part of the Raven clan. This is how she got the name White Raven. You can see in this picture and in the previous picture, here's a white raven. Even though it was called a school, St. Michael's was not a place where children got a good education. They spent more time doing chores and being punished than learning. When White Raven finally left at age 16, she proudly taught herself how to tell time. She was never taught this basic skill in all her years at St. Michael's. For most of her adult life, even as an elder, White Raven had nightmares about her time at the school. She learned that she had something called post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, I guess, which is common when people have had a lot of pain, shock, or sadness in their lives. White Raven realized that residential schools were not places of safety and learning. Instead, they were jails for Indigenous children. After sharing her story with her granddaughters, White Raven started going to workshops for residential school survivors. She learned that she was not a bad child, but that her childhood had been stolen from her. White Raven inspired her friends and family to sign up for the workshops too. It was healing for her to share these stories. It helped her grandchildren understand their grandmother better, and it made them love her even more. She told her grandchildren that they could do anything in life when they focused on it. She would always be proud of them no matter what, and she taught them that the things that make you different are the things that make you beautiful and strong. Almost 70 years after White Raven attended the school, and many years after she first shared her story with her granddaughters, some very special photos were collected for a show at a museum. These rare photos showed life at the residential school through the eyes of a student. The photos were taken by White Raven's older cousin, whose dad had given her a type of camera called a brownie when she was at St. Michael's. Little Wolf attended the exhibit and saw many photos of White Raven and her cousins as children. It was very exciting but also sad. These are the only photos that exist of White Raven when she was young. One photo showed White Raven as a sweet, smiling little girl in a skirt and blouse. Her head was shaved, and she was wearing socks that she had rolled down with no shoes. Little Wolf recognized her mother instantly because she always wore her socks rolled down like that, even as an adult. Another picture showed her surrounded by girls from the school, standing in front of an old totem pole. There's a White Raven. Six months after White Raven died, the Canadian government announced that all residential school survivors would be paid for each year they spent at the schools. White Raven had spent 10 years at the school, and she deserved to be compensated too, but sadly the decision came too late for her. Today, residential school survivors and their families, including White Raven's family, are still sharing their stories with each other and with non-Indigenous Canadians to bring the truth to light. So, here's a little picture here. A real picture about residential school. I'm going to pull away so I can read what it says below. Children at St. Michael's Indian Residential School by Beverly Brown, who was a student at the school. Lena White Raven, is third from the left. Jiaxiux, thank you to the family of Beverly Brown who granted permission to use this photo. So, another look at the picture. And that's the end. Well, these stories are important. It's important to know what happened to children in our province, in our country, children around the world, what happened to them when they are put into residential school settings. And I'm glad I could share that story with you today. That's all the time we have for Uncle Matt's bedtime story. I hope you enjoyed that story, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.